Some say he could control the weather with magic. Some say he got his enemy to give him free ammo. Some say he thwarted an army 100,000 strong by busking. Some say he ended a man's career in the world's first rap battle. Now, all we know is he's called Zhuge Liang of the Three Kingdoms period. And today, we'll try to get to know who he was and sort out what's fact, what's fiction, and what's just freaking awesome. So, if you haven't heard of him, you might wonder what's up with this whole fact versus fiction thing. Well, that controversy is because our knowledge about him and the Three Kingdoms, or Sanguo, period, comes from two works. The Sanguo Zhi, or the records of the Three Kingdoms, the de facto history written immediately after it happened, and the Sanguo Yanyi, or the romance of the Three Kingdoms, an embellished novelization that was written over 1,000 years later in the Ming Dynasty. There were a lot of discrepancies between the two works because the novel included a lot of stories that had been passed down as folklore, but were not actually included in the official records. But man, those stories are really good, and a lot of them involve Zhuge Liang. So today, we'll go over some of his greatest hits, both the confirmed and the contentious, and try to set the record straight. So, a long time ago, in a country far, far away, a prodigy was born. Just as one regime fell and a new empire was soon to take its place, he lost his parents when he was young and taken in by relatives. Those relatives also died not long after. No, I'm not talking about Luke Skywalker, but Zhuge Liang's childhood really was awfully similar. He was born in the year 181 AD, just as the Han Dynasty was falling apart. His dad was a local official, but his parents died when he was only a few years old. He was taken in by his dad's cousin, who was also a local official, but then he died when Zhuge Liang was 15. But without an Obi-Wan to guide him, he had to figure out what to do with himself, by himself. He was well-read, ridiculously smart, and could easily follow in his family's footsteps and become an official. But wasting his time and intellect in local politics when the whole empire is falling apart? No, thank you. Instead, he went off to a scenic area in central China called Lóngzhōng to live as a farmer, reading the classics, traveling with friends, and just generally being a free spirit. He soon got to be pretty well known in intellectual circles, but mostly known for being an arrogant teenager comparing himself with the greatest thinkers of history. Little did they know, his high-flying, big-picture thinking would actually bring balance to the Force. China. His closest friends knew he was capable of great things and called him Wolong and Fulong, Crouching Dragon and Hidden Dragon, respectively, because they knew he was a genius, waiting to be discovered. Wo means to crouch, Fu means to hide in ambush, and Long is dragon. Speaking of names, you might ask, isn't he also called Kong Ming? Aha, astute observation, young Padawan. Indeed, somewhere along the way to adulthood, he picked up the courtesy name Kong Ming, in which Kong means quite or very, and Ming means bright. Courtesy names were given by elders when a child came of age. But since his elders had died before he became an adult, there's no record of where exactly that name came from. Maybe his parents had planned it in advance. Maybe his relatives gave it to him ahead of time. Nobody knows for sure. But all we do know is, by this point, he was already known as Kong Ming, and this backwoods boy with a big imagination was about to burst on the national stage. But wait, wasn't he a free spirit doing whatever he wanted? How did he suddenly get famous? Well, not without a lot of convincing. To give some background, it was now 207 AD, and the shattered empire was on the verge of some big changes. The warlord Sun Quan had already secured his mostly autonomous kingdom over all of southeastern China. Warlord Cao Cao was establishing his stable and uncontested rule across all of northern China, with an eye on taking the entire country. The last warlord of any real consequence left was a distant relative of the Han dynasty's ruling family called Liú Bèi, who had settled with his relatively small army in central China, about 50 miles away from Kong Ming's home. Stuck between the immovable object that was Sun Quan and the unstoppable force that was Cao Cao, Liú Bèi was looking to consult some smart people to see what he should do in the face of the current political landscape. He was told there were two geniuses around, the Fulong Fengchu, literally Hidden Dragon Phoenix Youth, in which Hidden Dragon was, obviously, Kong Ming, while Phoenix Youth was another dude that Liú Bèi would find later. This term would eventually become an idiom to describe people who are secretly geniuses. Anyway, as we know, Kong Ming was never a huge fan of politics, and he definitely wasn't a fan of your average small-minded warmonger. But Liú Bèi wasn't your average warmonger. He had gathered his small but loyal following by sincerely caring for the common citizens, and he only fought because he felt it was his duty as an imperial relative to try to save the dying empire. There's a story in the novel which the official history does actually mention, that Liú Bèi went to visit Kong Ming twice, though was turned away both times. But he kept trying. You see, Kong Ming was trying to see whether Liú Bèi was truly as selfless and sincere as the rumors said. And when he saw this guy kept coming back, he knew Liú Bèi was the real deal, and finally sat down with him on his third visit. This changed everything. They turned out to be a perfect match. A leader truly fighting for the well-being of the people, and a thinker whose only ambition was to use his genius for the greater good. Kong Ming had devised what has since been called the Lóngzhōng Plan, or the Lóngzhōng Plan, named after the area he was living in, which divided China into three parts. Liú Bèi would first establish control over southwest China to hold off Cao Cao, then team up with Sun Quan in the southeast, and eventually the two would topple Cao Cao with their combined armies to restore the Han Dynasty's rightful rule. Basically, this means that it was Kong Ming who was actually the architect behind this whole three kingdoms thing. Liú Bèi agreed that this was the smartest way forward, and just like that, the hidden dragon rose from his slumber and took to the skies, leaving his carefree life behind to change the world as Liú Bèi's strategist and chancellor. But everything changed when Cao Cao attacked. Liú Bèi was forced to go on the run, and Kong Ming immediately went to meet with Sun Quan to get the alliance together. But here's another fun, true story. Sun Quan was super worried about Cao Cao's strength and wanted to surrender, and asked Kong Ming why Liú Bèi didn't do the same. Surrender? My noble lord Liú Bèi is well known as a defender of justice and a hero of righteousness. He would never just throw in the towel and betray his people, no matter the odds. Which, as planned, infuriated Sun Quan. How could he be a wuss and surrender without a fight when Liú Bèi, who barely had any troops and no territory to call his own, still refused to give up? With that, Sun Quan agreed to the alliance, and their combined forces faced off against Cao Cao at the legendary naval battle at Red Cliffs, the most famous and most dramatized battle of Chinese history, and perhaps Kong Ming's greatest claim to fame. As the story goes, Sun Quan's top commander was jealous of his genius and was worried he'd become a national threat in the future. So, he presented a challenge: prepare 100,000 arrows for the battle in a single week or be executed. Sounds impossible. Not for Kong Ming. He responded by saying he could do it in 3 days. Obviously, nobody believed him. He foresaw that the third day would be extremely foggy and sent a bunch of decoy ships covered in straw to pretend to attack Cao Cao's fleet. Cao Cao couldn't see that they were decoys and launched hundreds of thousands of arrows at the ships, which all got stuck in the straw and were still perfectly usable. Kong Ming then brought the ships back with the 1,000 arrows that the commander wanted, which of course made him hate Kong Ming even more. This kind of thing kept happening until the commander eventually, apparently, died of being so freaking mad that Kong Ming was just so freaking smart. This is the amazing story of 草船借箭, or borrowing arrows with straw boats, which I go into more detail in this video. Unfortunately, it was probably completely made up, as it wasn't in the official history at all. But there is a similar story from a few years later, where Sun Quan's ship was shot with so many arrows that it got thrown off balance, and he had to turn the ship around so that more arrows would hit the other side to keep the ship balanced. Maybe the idea isn't actually that far-fetched. Anyway, the battle itself, the plan, was to start it off with a bit of shock and awe by sending incendiary ships to firebomb Cao Cao's fleet first. But the wind was going the wrong way and the allies would end up burning themselves. What were they going to do? Leave it to Kong Ming, of course, because not only was he a genius, he was also a sorcerer. He used a magical ritual to pray for an eastern wind, and after 3 solid days, the wind actually came, and the attack could begin. This later became the saying, 万事俱备，只欠东风. All things are ready, except the east wind. Yeah, I don't really have an explanation for this one. I guess they just lucked out with the weather thing and thought, dang bro, that's gotta be Kong Ming. Anyway, whether he was the mastermind behind these mystical machinations or not, the consequence was that Cao Cao's war machine was stopped in its tracks and was forced to retreat back to the north, broken and bruised. Battle of Red Cliffs was like the Empire losing the first Death Star, and the Rebel Alliance had won. And with that resounding victory, Kong Ming returned to central China with Liú Bèi, and they started expanding his rule across the southwest according to the Lóngzhōng Plan. Finally, they could take a breather from the threat of Cao Cao and build a just and righteous kingdom that could stand the test of time. Sounds pretty peachy, doesn't it? But this was only the first step to realizing their dream of reviving the Han Dynasty, and there was still a lot to be done. Would Kong Ming truly be able to bring balance to the forces of China? Would his ways with the Force bring about a return of the Jedi underdog story? Or would Cao Cao's empire strike back? Well, stay tuned, because we'll unravel how Kong Ming's cookies crumbled, or not, next week on Learn Chinese Now. Until then, may the Force be with you, and 再见!